Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey.
All right, are we live?
Yes, we are.
All right. Cool. Well, I don't know. Thanks everyone for coming. Exciting to be talking to y'all, and thanks to everyone who's listening here. It's not that much of an agenda. I mean, we've got a bunch of shit we can talk about, but mostly want to talk about what you guys want to talk about too. And when it comes to Serum or DeFi or whoever's really pissing the hell out of you today. So maybe I'll just start with a little bit of a Serum plug, and then we can move on to less cringy stuff. Which is the Serum token SRM is listing today. It's listing in about 12 hours. It's just going to be super hectic and exciting, and hopefully a pretty good experience. So it's coming to an exchange near you. FTX, BitMax, Balancer, Uniswap, and likely a bunch of others as well. Which will, I mean, who knows? It's sort of like last minute calls on their part, but I, obviously would love to have everyone involved in that today. And then the other thing is that the sort of first pieces of the actual Serum product, the ecosystem, are going to be rolling out, over sort of the course of the month, which I'm really excited about. And maybe Anatoly and I can start getting a little more sleep at some point once that's there. But and sort of all the people working to do more important stuff than us who aren't on this call. But I'm super excited for that, and it's sort of like almost done, and also a lot left to do in the way that many things are, where it's like everything's done except hooking up to a GUI, and that last step takes like somewhere between a day and 3 weeks. So, anyway, they gonna have some stuff coming out pretty soon, which is exciting. So, anyway, that preamble done. I don't know, people want to just go around and say a little bit about yourselves?
Maybe happy to go first.
Go for it.
Hi everyone, Clement here from Genesis Block. We run a Bitcoin center in Hong Kong and do ATM and trading.
Hey, this is Anatoly. I'm co-founder and CEO of Solana.
Hey, I'm Calvin. I don't know if we're running clockwise or what, but I'm Calvin. I'm the strategy lead at Compound. Basically work on everything business related for the past 3 years.
Nice. I think we have different layouts.
Yeah,
but
anyway,
it's fine. Dan, partner at CMS. We're a principal trading shop, mostly sort of sprinkled throughout North America.
Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Samani. I'm a co-founder and managing partner at Multicoin, and we're pretty large investors in Serum and Solana.
Cool. And I'm Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm the CEO of Alameda Research and FTX, and Serum doesn't really have titles, but guy managing Serum. So this is super excited to have y'all on. These are some of my favorite people in the space and in the world. It's not a coincidence. So I don't know, maybe just to start off with, like, interested in sort of your guys' takes just on the DeFi space, in general, and specifically over the last few months, and what you see as, like, kind of the best and worst parts of it.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, I got you. All right, so we don't do a ton in the like farming side of it all, with like the sort of lending and borrowing aspect of it. Though we do touch upon it at certain pieces. We tend to still face most of the bilateral desks for the majority of our balance sheet moving and sort of borrowing. The thing we do face a lot on is the DEXs, and specifically these like AMMs, which have become very liquid and sort of relevant in a lot of the assets, especially new assets. It's because you can do it so quickly and so ubiquitously. We're seeing like that's just where the action is immediately and stuff that's like sort of getting out there in the ecosystem. And in general, the experience is pretty bad. We use it because we have to. The big issues are, even beyond fees, which are high, like that's like acceptable. Like you can like kind of deal with that knowing going into it. It's more like you don't know the pricing that you're paying ahead of time all the time. And I know that there's some variations now, things that let you like fix this better, but like in general, we've had a really hard time knowing what like the mechanics of the trade are until post settlement, which is pretty terrible. It hasn't dinged us yet, but like I'm very concerned one day I'm just gonna like nuke an order into there and like have 60% slippage and not entirely understand what happened. So like that's bad from a UI perspective. It's like bad from a user experience. It's like super confusing. And then the second aspect is definitely like the speed. Like I've been sitting there just like waiting for MetaMask at times to like do something. I'll punch the same transaction 4 times by accident because I'm like not sure if it's canceled. So I would say that it leaves a lot wanting still for the whole space. And it's just impossible to use this if you're like a new person moving into the industry. Like the hurdle to get to that point, to even be like punching those things is way too much. So like there's got to be a better way of interfacing a lot of this stuff to people too.
My meta comments of DeFi is like, you can see the future. Like you go to Curve, you go to Uniswap, you go to 1inch, you go to Compound, you go to Aave, like, and it's just like, there's no ACH transfers and like 3-day movements and all that shit. And you're like, wait a minute, like this is what money should be. And like, that's now like very apparent in a way that probably wasn't like as clear 12 months ago. But then like, you just mechanically run into like all the issues that like Dan just mentioned. And like, I think that's like a real big problem. And like this problem is like for every 1% growth in usage, like it's very possible that transaction fees and net settlement times increase 2 to 20x. Like it is probably a super linear curve because the bigger users are like less fee sensitive, and so the smaller users get like hammered like way harder in terms of user experience. And so like that's like the real challenge I think DeFi faces right now.
I've got like 2 perspectives I've been trying to kind of reconcile for the past really few months. One is really the Compound perspective, which is like we've been around for 3 years. We've constantly been building with like this long-term focus. And when we launched Comp and decentralized governance of the protocol, it kind of kicked off this little bull run in DeFi. It's getting to be a bigger and bigger bull run. And you know, from a Compound perspective, the way we think about the protocol is still, what do we, you know, the protocol is not designed to peak this year or next year. We hope the thing lasts for 20 years, 50 years, and was really infrastructure for crypto for a long time. But then as an investor, like right now, I'm like FOMOing to, you know, every single DeFi opportunity, trying every single product, doing all the liquidity farming. Like the money is made in these bull markets that come around every 3 or 4 years that only last 6 to 12 months. So those are 2 totally different mentalities. What I can say is from like a project building perspective, you know, what happened in 2013, happened in 2017 is all this money flooded in and sort of funded the research for the next 3 or 4 years, such that the utility of blockchains through each one of these bubbles increases exponentially. Like what you're seeing now, like Kyle said, with Curve, Uniswap, Balancer, Compound, Aave, is still just the framework of like really sophisticated financial system. And I bet in 3 to 4 years, it'll be like 100 times better. And there'll be yet another bull run, you know, that looks totally different. But reconciling those 2 views over the past few months has been kind of interesting, the long-term versus short-term opportunism. A lot of what is happening in DeFi today, I think you could think of as sort of short-term opportunism. Some of the projects that are launching, some of the ways users are being acquired.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Kevin. And for us, what we're seeing is most of the crypto people that have been, I mean, I used Ether Delta back then. So I think with using all these other platforms now, I think it's a lot better already. However, my only complaint is the fees are just extremely expensive. Just trying to do like a $1,000 trade, I could be paying, you know, $50 right now. Yesterday, I think the gas fees were gone up to like 250 Gwei, which makes no sense. I was teaching my cousin how to use it, and every time he was trying to buy something, you had to pay like $10 to $15. Otherwise, it won't go through. And you know, I've just given up on using high gas price on MetaMask. I just go to advanced and click like 150 just so the trade goes through. But I think it's still quite, I mean, Compound has a really easy, that's how I came back into this, like, you know, DEX trading. I mean, you do a few. I was trying to do a few trades on Binance DEX, which using Trust Wallet is pretty easy, and I think people can manage. Compound also makes it very easy to manage. But then I think people that got in stablecoin, or when I've explained to them this whole yield farming, they look at Curve and they're like, "Whoa, what is this? Like, do I want to trust this with $50,000 or not?" So I think there's I'm super excited with what Sam and his team is going to be launching, and hopefully that would be a way easier, better user interface for people to do their DeFi stuff.
Yeah, I think an important point to make is, right, like, I didn't want to like pour cold water on all this. Like, it's really almost like telling there's tons of people pushing through like the gates to try to use this stuff, right? It has so much usage that it's like ramming up all of the like offsetting things that like sort of check the system, that make it more expensive and sort of try to gate it. But that's just telling of like how many people want to use it, right? Like, there's like value here. There's like clearly a need. Like, there's a market there. It's just, it got way too big too quickly, and like the system's like clearly not stress tested to like get to that point that fast. So I don't know. It's a good thing that all of the sort of problems are happening and people are still continuing to try to get into it. I think that's like the big overall market theme you got to glare like from it.
Yeah. To add to what Daniel said, I'm like, it's awesome that we actually have products that are live, and this is what's driving the bull market, because like if you step a little bit off the green path in MetaMask or any of these things, you get lost pretty quickly, right? And stuff is like frustrating, but people are rushing in to try all this stuff right now. And that's fine that it's not yet fully developed. We at least know that there is product market fit. And that to me is like the really awesome thing about the space right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think the thing that made me excited about DeFi, and it sort of came through one of my tweet storms. My first one about Compound, I was just super fucking kind of excited about it, was just watching the on-chain governance and C tokens, but especially the on-chain governance. I think I just sort of saw it as like, holy fuck, that works. Like, it wasn't that like if you'd asked me, I'd be like, no, that's impossible. I would have said like, oh, can you do that? I guess you could, but it seems like you shouldn't be able to. But no, you can. And it's like, the fact that you can like, use smart contract based tokens to, send votes via smart contract on a proposal made via smart contract, from someone to modify a smart contract that controls smart contracts, that controls a protocol a lot of people are using with a description generated by the smart contract. Like, it's sort of like, you take this incredibly messy thing, which is like generating a proposal for how to make arbitrary modifications to a financial ecosystem and then voting on it. And you literally put it all on chain. And it's sort of like, oh, wow, like theoretically, this actually just works. And if you build a nice GUI on it, it actually works fine. And that's like sort of made me feel like, oh, wow, like, did you just do everything on chain? Like does DeFi actually kind of work in theory? And I think that was like one of my revelations. And I think the answer is yes, in theory it does. Not for everything, obviously, but at least for a bunch of shit. And then I think the other thing was just like struggling for like 2 weeks to try and build projects on Ethereum, and like every time, like sort of Jez would come back and be like, all right, Sam, bad news, gotta scrap this idea. Like, turns out it'll take 3 minutes to match each order. And sort of that happening for a few weeks, and then having a call with Kyle and Anatoly about Solana, and I sort of like came in knowing it's like, fast blockchain. Yeah, I've talked to 30 fast blockchains in the past week. That's what everyone is. But then just sort of like hearing them talking about it and feeling like, oh, this is actually a pretty different conversation from another fast blockchain conversations we had. Like, it sort of like, the random numbers thrown out were backed up by like really compelling proof that those were the right numbers. And also like the numbers were bigger than the other big numbers and also were true. And sort of like the vision was like kind of practical, and like, remember them asking me questions which were like good questions to ask, like, what would it take to get these types of trading volume on a DEX? What source feed matters? Which is sort of like, oh, wow, like no other fast blockchain asked that question. They're just like, obviously we're the best for everything. And so I think that was sort of like the second point. And we weren't seriously considering building on another chain going into that call. And sort of going out of that call, we like had an internal meeting and we're like, okay, like does this change things? This might change things, right?
I had like kind of similar like realization that like I've been like trying to find somebody that understands that like a layer one is, if you do it right, it's perfect for a decentralized exchange. But you can actually do price discovery in this thing. You can make it programmable and open, and then you have something magical, right? Like we could like have effectively an open, globally available, permissionless version of Binance that anybody can do anything in and like interact with all the state. And that was like, you were like one of the first people that was like, oh yeah, this is like totally like, yeah. So I am like, I thought this was going to take like 5 years for this like idea to like propagate from just a crazy dream to like, you know, the rest of the world. So I like couldn't be more excited, like to like, especially building this in like basically 2 weeks.
Yeah. And we're pretty excited too. And I do think like people often ask us why do you use Solana, and like one of the reasons is like it's super fucking fast, and that's a big part of it. But like we like working with you guys. And that's just like unbelievably important. Like anyone who's tried working with a team they don't like you just want to kill yourself after like a week, and like after 2 weeks the project's just dead, and no one even knows why. Because the idea is there's sort of no reason. The answer is like you just didn't get along, and it's just like every single thing was 12 times as hard as it was supposed to be. And so just like, yeah, being able to work well together is just worth so much.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's like become clear is like Ethereum is constrained in terms of throughput and latency, right? And a lot of like the success of Uniswap, like we look at the history of DEXs, Ether Delta was a central limit order book, and then like, and it had a lot of problems. And the 0x team came out and they were like, hey, you know, like off-chain matching, on-chain settlement. And it was an improvement, but like still it kind of struggled a little bit. And like there weren't that many market makers that were interested in doing this for, you know, multi-minute settlements and all those things. And like it seemed like DEXs weren't working through most of 18. And then, you know, Hayden like threw Uniswap on there, and like it was simple, it was clever, and it like helped the DEX kind of thing get going in a meaningful way. The funny thing is like automated market makers have like been well known for a long time in academic theory, and the reason no one ever built them was very obvious because like they're not good traders. Like, and so we just had this simple thing that was clever that like worked within this very constrained environment. But like financial markets, like it's well understood that like a central limit order book is like the correct way to do price discovery and trading. And so like in my mind, like for the last year and a half internally, we've been joking about like where is decentralized BitMEX? Like we want to invest in decentralized BitMEX, and like Serum is really the first thing I think that fully encapsulates that. And I think in order to do that, you have to have an order book, because like that's how you actually facilitate price discovery and liquidity at scale.
Yeah. I think one thing worth noting is like a lot of people don't want to use an order book. They want to use like a market order or an AMM type thing. And I think it's like super important to have those interfaces, but also for those to work well and have liquidity to build off of, there needs to be an order book behind it. That's like generating that sort of like pricing and liquidity and stuff.
Yeah, it's like two worlds, right? Like you have people that are like, I have this, I want this, and they don't care about anything that's going on in the interim. And then you have an entire industry of people that are like in the business of like facilitating those two. And the problem is like the DEXs, you just like, you never could get the people that like needed to take liquidity. Like it was too much of a hurdle, right? Like it was confusing, like you were clicking, like it didn't make sense, like stuff was like, so that knocked it off. And then Uniswap is too far in the other direction where it's like, you just like, you don't really entirely even know what's going on all the time in the center. You're just like clicking and swapping. And that's really good for the pool of people that, I don't want to say like unsophisticated, because I don't think that's the world where it's like people that just don't have either the bandwidth or like the cares to like go that far in for however much like sort of business they're doing in it. So it like really caters that. And like you see that blossom really quickly. And I mean, obviously there's some like mania that fed into it, but that's not a good solution for those people long term. They're just like sort of obfuscated from like what's going on in the background and sort of what they're paying. So I don't know. It's right. Like, I mean, you'll get to this world where like you'll have a UI that'll look like effectively I have X, I get Y, but then like the actual order book and stuff going on in the background that'll like make it work right.
Yeah.
Sam, I'm assuming Serum is going to have like a simple view, right? Yeah. Where like it'll look like Uniswap or 1inch or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like lots of exchanges are coming out with these. We are not the first ones to come up with it, although I think we did like a very slight improvement on a lot of people's versions of it. So now you can see kind of like a lot of exchanges have just like copied the phrasing that FTX used for sort of their version of this, although they had a different version of it before we had one. But it's sort of like market order or convert or whatever you want to call it. This thing where the Uniswap interface, we're just like, I have this and I want this other thing. Here's the button to do that. And the nice thing is that like you can have that buying or selling interface, but then on the back end it can be plugging into a full order book so that you get like good execution on it.
Do you think that Serum, you take part of the pie from like competitive exchanges, including even like your own centralized exchange, or you think it grows the pie and sort of invites in a new class of traders that aren't in crypto today?
I think that in the upside case, it does all of those really massively. And just to put that in perspective, like 3 months ago, DEX global volume per day was under $10 million. And so like the upside just kind of definitely isn't just trying to take what was the pre-liquidity mining DEX volume. Like that's not the grand prize here. The real goal of Serum is to get a hell of a lot more than that. And some of that probably comes from centralized exchanges. Some of that is probably brand new volume. Some of that may come from other forms of trading, non-crypto venues. Some of that may come from OTC. And a lot of that, the real goal is a lot of that is new volume, is economically efficient trades that wanted to happen, but couldn't because they wanted to happen on a DEX and didn't want to pay $5 to do a trade.
Yeah, I think one of the other things we're going to see that is really market expansionary is going to be bringing other asset classes into crypto payment rails or crypto trading rails. Yeah. So like the feature, like Uniswap, we see this now. People make up a token, put it on Uniswap, write some tweets about it, put up a website, and like say it's DeFi and the price goes up, right? And you can do that in like 24 hours and like make that happen. And that's only possible because the whole thing is permissionless. So I expect like with the central and order book, you're going to be able to put that like on steroids. And then I think what you're going to see is you're going to see people take external price feeds for other assets. So like it's going to be companies like, I don't know, Tesla or like Tencent or whatever, like high known, well-known companies. And they're going to start creating synthetic contracts of various forms on something like Serum, whether it's in a perpetual contract or some other construction. But like you're going to start to see a lot of that. And then people are going to be able to have a single pool of collateral and they're going to be able to trade crypto and equities, right? And like that's going to be like a wild thing. So it's going to just be like the ultimate trading playground for like a whole class of trader.
Yeah.
I think like also back to the question about like it eating into like the centralized exchange. So like the world right now is stuff kind of like is birthed into the world on like the DEXs and sort of the Uniswap, right? Like that's the lowest like barrier. Like that's where stuff gets first. And then when it picks up sufficient liquidity and interest, unless it's like something that already had like a ton beforehand and like clearly was just going to get listed, like then the centralized exchanges go, all right, well that thing's got some volume, we should list it. Like that thing's getting picked up, right? But there's a world where people don't need to migrate, right? Like if that experience is good enough and you keep them there, it just stays there. And I think because it does have that lowest barrier entry, like you'll be able to like sort of keep that pool of people there constantly instead of them bouncing off to the centralized exchanges because they're like, I can go do this over here now because I don't have to pay all the fees and deal with all the nonsense, right? But like if they don't have that problem, they probably never leave at all.
Yeah, so like the crazy thing with Serum is that you can have a centralized like experience, and if that's where the initial liquidity starts, it's just going to snowball there, right? It doesn't matter if like the second or third and fourth exchange list. If this is like where the project goes live and it picks up steam, like that's where it's going to stay. That's like a much more open, organic growth model, right? We kind of get a chance to redraw the map, so to speak.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I would do a little bit of justice to the commenter RK, who's been sort of lightly needling us here, and sort of try and give a little bit of an answer to like why the fuck do we think we can do this, in sort of like a short period of time, and I don't know. I mean, honestly, a lot of my answer here is like, I don't know, like you want to take a bet, sort of like we'll see where we are in a month, and I do think that is like some of my answer, but maybe to give like a little bit of sense of why I think that, other than that sort of like C code getting written, is is that I think there are a lot of things that are like really powerful and hard, but they're not hard in the like you need to develop general relativity hard, where you need to be like a singular genius taking decades and get extremely lucky. They're hard in the like there's a lot of intricate things you need to get right hard, but if you do a good job at it, you can do it. You just need to do a good job at it and sort of throw everything you have at it. And I think that's really reflected on sort of like my experiences of what has gone well and poorly. And I think you've seen FTX launch some products that didn't go so well. They aren't like atrocious. They just like never got that much steam. And I think like often the answer is like, I don't know, we kind of like 3/4 asked it and like it didn't solve a lot of the hard problems with it. And it's just like an okay but not great trading experience. And then they just sort of sit there. And then I think you look at the products that like really fucking take off, and I think it's like, no, like we ground through it and really got to the bottom of like what's the right way to do this. And I think like FTX Exchange is also an example of that, where it's sort of like that's a, you know, I mean, it was a pretty quickly built product, all things considered, going to launch. And I think here this is like a little bit of that on steroids. I mean, it's sort of like been a really massive effort. Like, you know, what's sort of like making this better? Well, first of all, just choosing a fast blockchain and choosing a really fast blockchain and the right fast blockchain is worth like a fair bit. And that's like something that like very few people seem to be doing. And I think it's like, it actually takes a lot of work to figure out what the right place to build this on is. Like we had, you know, 30 calls before we got to one that sort of like helped really answer this. And you need to keep grinding and like really grilling people on it. Another thing is like thinking about how it's going to plug into the rest of the ecosystem. Like that's a really hard thing, and you see a lot of good products built and just flop because no one ever uses them. You know, that's sort of another thing. How'd you get liquidity? So many exchanges have just like been born and died because they never got liquidity. And you know, through some you know, market making partnerships, this is like sort of a sort of like unfair advantage that Serum's going to have, that it's going to be liquid from day one. And so that's sort of like another big advantage that has going for it. You know, we've built matching engines before, we've built a lot of this stuff, we've been through that ringer. And so, you know, that's going to help a lot. Just, you know, not having to make the same pitfalls again and again. And then there's just a ton of people working on this. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, obviously people that I've been working with for a while have been helping to build it out, but the whole Solana team's been working to build this out, everything from building out the ecosystem to like, you know, rolling out, you know, modules that are helpful to answering a ton of questions. There's like 7 different wallet companies right now kind of quickly building out support for SPL tokens, gotten a ton of support from exchanges, and a ton of support from like the community. Like the number of people working to build out their nodes before nodes even exist is like really flattering. And I think really, really exciting for Serum, because it means that there's going to be actually a lot of people working hard to make it, you know, go as well as it can. And you know, I've like gotten a ton of support from a lot of the people on this call too, which has been like really valuable. And I think you kind of throw everything like that at it, and you solve a lot of the problems that sort of a lot of exchanges and DEXs and protocols have when they launch. And then I'll say like one last thing, which I think optimistic rolls are just super cool and really powerful. They're not easy. They're not easy to get right, especially if you want to go bi-directional from like a slow chain to a fast chain. Like there's just a lot of shit that goes into it. It's really sort to get it right, but you can do it. Like it's sort of like the pseudocode exists and it's just grinding away at it. But if you get there, it creates this like fully on-chain, you know, fully trustless cross-border protocol that is fast and efficient and cheap. And that's like, you know, really powerful as well for, you know, for sort of cross-chain transactions. So, you know, throwing all of that together and really just sort of like going all out on each part of this is sort of like my best attempt at answering like why I'm sort of more bullish on Serum than like generic DEX that launches and says it's going to be the next big thing.
I'll add one thing from a different angle. You know, we've been hearing people in Bitcoin and Ethereum communities talking about layer 2 since what, 2014 or so. I think the first layer 2s went live in the last 90 to 120 days with some ZK rollup things that thus far have usage rounds to 0 effectively. There's supposed to be more layer 2 things coming out in the nearish future, but like the layer 2 stuff is actually like all fragmented and like going in different directions. Solana, like today, it's just like a single thing and like it works and it scales. And so a big part of the challenge for scaling these things before has been that it wasn't possible, and it is now. I think the other big thing is just like looking at the tool chain that's available. When Ethereum launched in 2015, there literally was no EVM tool chain. And like Solana is built natively in Rust, and flagship language is Rust. And like Rust is like by far like the most robust and actively developed like developer community now across any major set of programming languages. And Solana doesn't inherit like a huge percentage of that kind of organically that Ethereum never inherited. And so that is just like a very asymmetric advantage. Oh, and then the last thing is just like the growth of like wallets and key management systems like Taurus and Portis and Formatic and all these other things like has just made it so much easier to like onboard a new blockchain. And so like one thing we've been saying internally is we expect the new chains that are like designed well to improve their ecosystem like efficiency at probably 10x the pace that Ethereum did. I think Solana is going to be like the first high profile case of that.
Yeah, I mean, we got lucky by being, by not being first, right? We kind of get to benefit from all the experience of everyone else in the space. And like Kyle said, like using a language that is people at, all the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, they actually know that language, right? So like we have a much larger pool of developers, engineers, and like basically anyone that's been coding in the last decade can jump in and start building stuff. And that's kind of a huge advantage and much lower entry to barrier. And, we also got lucky with our particular set of tech that we wanted to build, right? We chose a problem where there's only one hard computer science problem instead of 2 or 3. So once we solved that, like everything else was just grinding in the engineering. And that's like, that's a job, and we love to do it, but like you can actually do it and get it done in a reasonable amount of time. And I think like, I think why Serum is like an opportunity right now is because we're left with just those like problems that we need to grind through, and it's just work, and we rapidly can get it done. We have like all the tools and all the people to just kind of grind through we're going to make some awkward product decisions, some weird UI choices, right? But like that stuff is fixable, right? Like all the like actual meat and bones is done. The rest is just like making it pretty and like making it good for the user. So that part is just work, right? And that's fine. It's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, it's like echo something that like one of our devs said upon like looking through the, kind of taking a deep dive. And Solana said, look, there's a lot of good things and a lot of bad things, but the great news is that all the really hard, important things are great. And all the bad things are the things that just like you can roll out and fix. And so even though it's like not a great product right now, in 1 month, it can be an amazing product because it's like, it's sort of the stuff that you can, just snap up, like building a good GUI for a wallet. That was sort of like, the biggest remaining things. And all the super hard shit they'd done, just a fantastic job of.
Have you said when you expect like a first set of products to roll out?
Yeah, so I think that the thing I keep saying is the next few weeks, which I think is about accurate. And to give a sense of like, where that time scale comes from, there's like, we're sort of sitting here thinking like, okay, is it going to be live by the end of this live stream? Probably not. Is it going to be live by the end of 2 weeks from now? Probably. And it's sort of like a weirdly large number of orders of magnitude of variance. And what's going on there is basically like everything is theoretically solved. It's just like when we try and hook up everything to each other, like do we run into like annoying things we need to work around? And like how many times does that happen? And like each one delays it a day. So it's, to give the answer, basically, there is on testnet, an exchange. It just doesn't have like any GUIs or wallets or anything like that hooked up to it. And like it's sort of grinding through all those connections and making sure that those work okay. And then seeing like, whether we're stretching some part of the system we didn't think hard about. So it's, sometime in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have, and it's not going to be the entire white paper, obviously, but the goal is to have like a DEX that's fast that you can do a trade on. That's like the first product.
Do you have a
integration?
What?
Yeah, integration is the fun part, right? Like just everything that you half-assed goes wrong.
Yeah.
do you have a sense if you'll launch with like a pair that people are familiar with, or like 100 pairs, or like 2 pairs?
Yeah, it's a good question. Sort of. I mean, first of all, I like we want to launch with what people want us to launch with. Like that's sort of the definition of what an exchange should have, like what people want to trade. So if everyone's just like, Wi-Fi, that's all that matters. Like, all right, sure. But sort of to give a real answer, the first and easiest thing we can do just to get like MVP up is basically create SPL wrappers on the 6 most highest volume tokens and list them there, and list them against stable coins, and so have Bitcoin, ETH, Sol, Serum, and then a few other things trading against stable coins. That's like sort of like the obvious product that's like covering the gigantic bases, and then sort of like thinking way harder about listings once that MVP is up. So,
all right. What questions we got?
Yeah, there's let me see. A lot of things about do we have customers, traders lined up to trade on the DEX? Sort of the answer is like, in theory, yes, but it's like really hard to gauge how much volume that's going to be. You have like 300 people on Twitter saying they're going to do it as soon as it launches, and you sort of have no idea how much volume comes from that, right? Is that like $2,000 or 20 million? And you've got all these market makers like, yeah, we're super excited to get set up, but also they have a history of taking 6 months to get set up on anything, and like who knows what happens. And so like I think it's really hard to predict what happens on like week 1. But I think what I would say instead is on like by month 6, we have like a significant fraction of the crypto ecosystem that's like expressed a lot of excitement to be part of it. And so I think I'm like super excited about the potential for it to get a huge amount of traction over a reasonable time frame, if, and this is a big if it's going well, if the product turns out well, and things like that. Were there other chains that were close, or is Solana the only choice? Yes, and in fact, Solana wasn't even the first time that we made a choice. Like, sort of, had gone through a few relationships before getting here, so basically, like, it's why do we settle there? Because it was sort of like better in most ways than most of the other things we thought about. But like maybe one thing too, sort of interesting, is like we want something fast. So you start with Bitcoin, then you go to ETH, which is how much faster? Is it like 10 times faster or something like that? I don't know. By faster, I basically mean like throughput at max capacity. Then you go on to sort of this like 2018 generation of blockchains, which are like things number like 5 through 15 on CoinMarketCap. And so you have, EOS is like an example of one of those, which are a good, 50 to 100 times faster than Ethereum. And then you have Solana, which is what, another factor of 100 faster than those. And that last factor of 100 is actually worth a lot. But we sort of like, we're sort of like in the middle for a while as well before we got there. And there's a few other blockchains that have like pretty exciting tech. They weren't there. They weren't ready for it, or they had various drawbacks. But we'll sort of like obviously, see where the world is in a while. But like, so as far as we can tell, in the end, in the most important ways, Solana was just sort of seemed like the best.
That's awesome. I mean, like, I love hearing you speak about that. But like, I think like why it's fast. Like people often like overlook a very simple thing that we did, which is we focused on horizontally scaling the execution of the transactions, which means that like we can just throw hardware at it. Whenever there is like actual bottlenecks, these are problems that engineers can solve. We don't have to like spend years of developing or in researching another solution to scale or layer 2 or anything like that. It's literally just get more CPUs to validators. And like, if we get product market fit with a decentralized exchange, the $100,000 cost of hardware is like basically insignificant, like to like double capacity. It's just never going to be like a factor that like anyone should ever consider to be a problem. And that's kind of like the fundamental difference about how we've been designing this thing is like, can we churn money into scale, right? Like that's like, if we can, then the problem solved.
One thing I've I spent a lot of time looking at all the layer ones, and I was surprised by Solana is the only one that I'm aware of that made this decision, is to enable parallel transaction processing inside of a single shard. For context on that, like on Ethereum, when your transaction is being processed by the EVM, that transaction can theoretically call any other transaction and touch any other transaction in the system. So effectively, like if you don't have two transactions writing, at the same memory space at the same time, like, and if you don't know what the transaction is doing ahead of time, then every transaction like can't be processed in parallel. They all go sequentially. And so every transaction effectively has a global monopoly on time of the system to execute that transaction. And so like Ethereum is capped by single-threaded performance.
Yeah, like imagine you like built a matching engine where every trade locks up the entire matching engine for every time, right? Like it's just like absurd, right? There's no way that thing would work for anyone, right? And this stuff has been around since I would say like late 70s, like where people started building like DBase and like those old school databases. Like this idea of isolating transactions and running stuff in parallel is like ancient.
Yeah.
So Anatoly, had you been like ready for this? Were you waiting for like the right party to kind of?
Yeah, like my pitch deck, like how I met Kyle too was like in this like DEX forum that Joe Carson set up, and I was like, hey, we're gonna decentralize NASDAQ. We're building for 500,000 TPS on the gigabit, and like people laughed at me, and Kyle was like, okay, let me talk to this guy, and that was like the start of the conversation. My pitch deck has this like blockchain built for NASDAQ kind of like tagline. It's pretty cringy, but like I always thought that like if you have this programmable state machine, it is by definition of an engine of price discovery. And it's a really weird one because you can like throw arbitrary contracts there, arbitrary like programs, and then computing the state arbitrage is like an intractable problem. It's like impossible to figure out what actually is the lowest kind of point of price for anything. So it's like a really interesting like price discovery engine, but it is what it is, right? Like if that state has value and there's programs that are dynamic and people are going to read the state and figure out how do I extract value out of this thing, right? This is like what traders do when they look at all the automatic market makers. But I think that the really cool thing is like with a central limit order book, you have a sophisticated like curve that is decided by like the risk like algorithms that all of these like market makers and traders can take, and they can take these positions that reflect a whole bunch of parameters, not just like a single kind of curve that they're placing bets on. And in that space, there's just so much more opportunity to leverage capital and reduce fees and improve costs for users, and like I think an opportunity to move real finance into this decentralized space. So sorry, I mean, this was my vision. Like it's crazy, like, but I found Sam that had like shares the same idea. So like that to me is like super exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Serum's been getting a lot of hype the last 3-4 months. Have you been hearing more developers contacting you guys with their ideas? I mean, has this helped like Solana, like as a big picture? So what do you see like?
Yeah, overnight, like in terms of kind of like just general ecosystem stuff, like Sam said, we focused 100% on the hard problem, was like get this thing as fast as possible and get consensus to the lowest latency. And like, if this is important, then developers will just fix all the other stuff, right? Like the wallets, all that stuff is things that people know how to build. And like when this project kicked off, we had like basically a dozen teams overnight to start building like all the tooling and every kind of bridge solution, from kind of lowest technical risk with the most trust assumptions to the like highest technical risk, which is a full smart, two-way smart contract based light client thing, with the lowest trust assumptions, where the consensus and like censorship resistant guarantees are based on the fundamental liveness of both chains, right? So that like kind of just we knew all those people in the space, right? We've been building for years, talking for years to these folks, but like as soon as this catalyst happened, everybody just kind of joined in and jumped on. And there's a bunch of stuff that I think Serum is listed and things that are in the pipeline that haven't been announced yet, but like every DeFi project has potentially an alternative to Ethereum, right? Like it's Ethereum DeFi and the ecosystem and the community there right now is unbeatable. Like that is 100% true, right? Like, but there is, if you want to do something different that you cannot possibly do on Ethereum, even in a layer 2, there's like an opportunity to do so now.
Have the direct asset issuers started reaching out, like the stable coins, and then probably some of like the other sort of like native assets that sit on top of Ethereum, that especially ones that are multi-chain? Because like that's got to be useful for you guys if you can get that in natively, especially in the context like Serum, but even just like a larger scale.
So like this is the fundamental difference between a layer 1 and any kind of layer 2 solution, is that the rails to stablecoins and exchanges cannot go directly into a layer 2, right? So you have this like a DEX, right, with execution and its local settlement that still has to do a settlement hop from that environment to the main chain and then transfer to, let's say, Tether, right, to convert to fiat. You can't really scale finance that way, right? Like if you're talking about like big institutional money, or like not even, but like big traders that have big balance sheets coming into the space, all those hops add additional risk. Like if you're stuck in like ZK rollup with like 2-week kind of like challenge or whatever, like if you're stuck in optimistic rollup that takes 2 weeks, that somebody could potentially challenge your withdrawal, right? You have to take that into consideration for the risk of those assets and the price you're gonna take inside that trading environment. Versus you're in a layer 1 that has a direct layer to, like, let's say Tether, right? You do your trade, you convert to Tether, you can burn it and get fiat instantly, right? That's the difference, is that like there's like basically all those speed bumps are eliminated in the layer 1. And having a central limit order book is like, I think, the coolest thing, because now we have risk and positions taken by large firms with large balance sheets. You can literally like use that as a real oracle that gives you like the stuff that I want to build is like a automated like request for quote engine where there's a central limit order book. I am doing some kind of crazy oracle thing, and when I need to liquidate, I get a real quote. I'm not dealing with like a price feed. I can actually settle to this thing immediately. Like all this stuff becomes possible where like all those risks that are present in DeFi right now, because of these extra hops, are eliminated. Like in my mind, this is as significant as like the settlement in Bitcoin and the amount of security it guarantees is, I think, what created this like liquidity monster. And if we have those same kind of guarantees of state and value and those numbers, like where I'm not taking risk with like some weird network that's mixing prices and like manipulating them to get an edge. Like if we can get those guarantees, I think this will have as much impact as the security of Bitcoin. But I'm obviously, I'm obviously very bullish, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
I think this, like, when you think about the future, right? Like you imagine science fiction finance. Do you imagine like layer 2, or do you imagine one giant supercomputer that is open and permissionless? All this stuff happens in a single address space. Like, what do you think, right? Like, what do you imagine, right?
I just think, and then it trades.
Right.
No, I get where you're coming from on that. So I guess, I mean, it has to be good, right? Like, I mean, like this has to be like a huge vote of confidence for you guys that's got to like significantly advance the conversation. You were probably having these conversations at many levels, but I'm sure it's kickstarting it to be a little more like, all right, let's get this done.
It's like napalm. Like it feels like everything is moving like at 100 times speed.
Yeah.
Sam, I got a question for you. So we use all the major centralized exchanges, and I got to say my favorite user interface across any of them is FTX's. Just like the spacing, the elements you can drag and drop, the components and all that stuff.
Thank you.
It's very well done. Are you guys going to be bringing that front end or parts of that front end to Serum? Like, can you hook up that front end to the new Serum backend?
Yeah. So there's going to be some changes, and another thing I'll say is like it's going to be open source. Anyone can do this. Anyone can build their own GUI. Anyone can add on to a GUI. Like, this is not like this is the only way to access it. Like, it's a blockchain that's open. But that being said, like, yeah, obviously we want to have a good GUI, and we're going to bring a lot of the elements in at least like one sort of piece of code for GUI that we're going to be publishing. And I think other people are as well. And one of the really nice things about how Serum is designed is that it's sort of, in most ways, you can just plug into it. Like, you can plug into a normal centralized exchange. Not quite like that. Like, there's an extra step, but it's not massively harder. There's an API. There's like an API interface where you can call like, send order of, Bitcoin, USDT, 12,000, 1 or whatever. And so that means that it's, relatively easy for, algorithmic traders to plug into. It also means it's relatively easy to stick a GUI on. You don't have to the GUI doesn't have to understand the blockchain. The GUI can just use the API effectively, which makes it a lot easier to sort of port things like that over, and to create sophisticated GUIs on it. And what's happening on the back end basically is and it's all open source. There's wrappers that take that API syntax and turn it into the relevant blockchain code, and so you call those, and then you send that to your Solana wallet and say, hey, please run this, and then that sort of sends it to the blockchain, and that's sort of what the flow looks like. And so other than that, having to communicate with your wallet point of view, instead of a centralized server, the sort of plugging in is very much like a centralized exchange, which means you can just port over a lot of stuff without too much work, which is really nice.
Any world where you just access all of that via the FTX current UI, so it's not even two experiences, it's all just sort of seamless, you just swap between the two?
Yeah, and in fact, one thing that I will say is one thing that you could imagine doing is FTX just listing BTC-perp-Serum or something like that as a market on FTX, just through your FTX account and GUI, but that plugs into the Serum market, and there's no reason you can't do that. And I think but we're gonna have to see what makes sense and what there's demand for, but there's that's doable. You just have to think about where the funds are stored and who has the keys there. So
am I right? Theoretically, someone can build a wallet and use your open source and just create a GUI, and all that person needs to do that. It could be a complete new person in the space, just download that wallet, and it can also trade there.
Yep, absolutely.
All in one place. Right.
Yep, there's no gatekeeper here. It's all on chain, and that's the cool thing about that. It's Serum's gonna be 100% on chain. It's not like you got some on chain funds and you do your off chain magic, and then some trades happen. The matching engine's on chain, the order book's on chain, the funds are on chain, everything is on chain, and so anyone can build a GUI or wallet plug into it, and we're gonna be open sourcing all the things that we build for it. So.
Amazing.
The business of 1inch is routing trades through multiple DEXs or AMMs or whatever. How come order book exchanges can't route through multiple pairs, or at least they don't offer it as often because it's not deterministic? You're not guaranteed to fill.
There's a lot of things. So the question is, why isn't there something that plugs into a bunch of centralized exchanges together?
Yeah, or even on FTX, there's a BTC to USDT pair.
Yep.
Or maybe that's not a good example. Why can't I go one shitcoin to another shitcoin?
Right. So the answer is basically that you could build an incredibly sophisticated algorithm that made a lot of money doing that, then you're a trading firm, or you could build sort of a pretty dumb, naive algorithm that will do that. and then all of your customers will be irate every day because it didn't do exactly what they hoped it did. And it's sort of an unfortunate fact of the world, but it's really true. Building non-deterministic financial software for customers is terrifying, because they're always going to claim it didn't do what they hoped it did, and that puts you in a really shit spot. That's one of the big worries here. And as you say, like, you whiff on an exchange customer, so why it whiff? It shouldn't have whiffed. That's not a great user experience, and so I think that's sort of one of the big problems. And the other big problem is, like, at some point you sort of ask, like, what's the value add here if the customer has to separately go create an account at every exchange, fund every exchange separately, there's no cross collateral, no cross margin, get their APIs collected, then submitted to central place. Like, you've already made them go through a lot of the work. That being said, there are some places that do a really sleek job of this. You see, like, 3 Commas and Stacked and places like that actually do create cool shit for connecting between different exchanges. But it's actually quite a complex thing to do that in such a way that, like, users are more happy than they are angry.
It kind of sounds like you're explaining the problem with Uniswap there, when you're like,
oh yeah,
right? Like, it's kind of the same issue.
Yeah, it's, you know, the Uniswap Oracle filled you at a price. I don't know what price. It's a price. We'll tell you later.
Right.
Maybe there's some fees. You'll see. Yeah, no, it's pretty scary, and I think people put up with it because they have to, sort of. But it really limits what DeFi can do. I mean, you know, you can't send a $2 million order because you don't want that sitting out there for 5 minutes. You can't send a $20 order because you're going to be paying $5 set in fees. You can't really send orders in Bitcoin because there's too much price discovery on short time scales. So you're sort of left with $5,000 trades in shitcoins. That's the thing you can do on Uniswap. And not surprisingly, that's what Uniswap has. Like, that's what AMMs are great at, and that's not most of what the volume is in the world, but it's most of the volume that they're accessing because it's what they're able to.
Let's look at these questions here. One of them talks about Serum BTC and Serum USD. Do you say much there, Sam?
Yeah. So basically, what are these? They're basically like just like suggestions for types of tokenized products that you can build on Serum, and you know what they're in particular is, you know, ways to try and get dollars or bitcoins onto Solana. And it's generally hard to move dollars and bitcoins onto other chains because they're not currently on a smart contract chain. One's not even on a blockchain. So you need to make trade-offs between centralization and utility there. And they're just meant to be like kind of suggestions of ways that might be like Pareto improvements over some versions of it. Right now, I would think it'd be pretty cool. And maybe the thing that sort of like ties them into Serum is that they rely on a bunch of shit that you can't do on most places, like speed, or like intricate enough that like they just wouldn't work on Ethereum. There's too many steps. It's too slow and expensive. And so, and they rely on price oracles, like on-chain price oracles. You need an actual DEX with an order book to do that. So in a lot of ways, it's just like, you know, they sort of like are intensive enough to run that they can only run on sort of like a, you know, real order book. Do we have API docs released? We have API docs on a GitHub. They're like 90% complete. If you're actually excited to build on them, shoot me a message. We can get you access to the repo now. Otherwise, in like 2 days, we're gonna have it fully open to the public. We just want to like remove the embarrassing comments and implement the last things before we sort of like, you know, open up to too much scorn. Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of fun. You know, really thanks to everyone for, you know, for listening in, and big thanks to the 5 of you for coming here and also for helping us so much that I was excited to have you guys come here. You've really kind of each helped make, you know, Serum happen, and that's true of a lot of other people too. And it's like super fucking grateful to all the support we've gotten. And I think it's just like, yeah, we'd have like a third as much done if it weren't for that. So that's worth a lot. Again, shameless shill for the listing tonight. Whatever, go projectserum.com/listing and take a look at that. But more importantly, the actual product's going to be launching, the next couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to have that go live and sort of let people experience it. I unfortunately have to run now. I have a yet another listing call with one of the billion exchanges that are going to list it maybe sometime in the next 20 years or maybe tomorrow. Who knows? So I'm gonna have to jump off, but yeah, thanks so much to everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
See you guys.
See ya.